Hi, this is the Evolution Lab podcast, and I'm Matt Roberts. This is part of my ongoing mission to keep developing the optimum way to help people reach their goals, overcome adversity, and change perceptions about what's possible to achieve with our bodies. The Evolution Lab is all about being the very best version of you. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and follow the podcast, and make sure you leave a rating and review. It'll help others to find the podcast to share and enjoy too. And now, let's get into the show. My guest today on the Evolution Lab is someone who is an investor, philanthropist, health obsessive, and longevity investor. He went to Oxford University to study politics, economics, and philosophy, after which he became a fund manager and investor. He made his first million by the age of 28. Apparently, we'll ask about that in a second. And went on to earn big in trades in Russian industry and uranium, I believe. Today, he's considered to be one of the most successful investors of generation, and his goal is to identify money fountains, which are market trends that represent a step change for society and therefore represent huge investment opportunities. In the past 5 years, he's invested in longevity science and is a co-founder of a biotech company called Juvenescence, a biotech investment vehicle. My guest is Jim Mellon. Jim, how are you?
Matt, well, it's great to see you. And after quite a few years, I think I saw you on the street once, but apart from that, it's really good to see you. And I'm very pleased to be on this. I think health obsessive is possibly not a good description of me. It might be of some of my colleagues, but
well, we're going to find out.
I'm really pleased that you've chosen me as one of your podcasters, I suppose. So thank you very much.
Well, my pleasure. I can give some context to all of that. So you have been a client of my company over the years. I think it's probably 20 odd years ago, Jim, that first became a client, probably 23 or 4 years ago. I think we've both done okay, both aged all right, I think. We'll discuss that as well.
And we're still here.
We're still here. That's probably the key thing. And in terms of what you've done over the years, you're a serial investor who's made millions, who knows, maybe billions in investing, which is amazing. So why are you here? Why are you on the Evolution Lab talking about health rather than trading shares? So maybe in 60 seconds, give me your version of why you're here and your interest in health, well-being, fitness, longevity.
You're right. I mean, I've been in quite a few things in my career. Some of them somewhat checkered, but generally okay. But about 15 years ago, I got really interested in biotech because, healthcare is the biggest industry in the world, and it's going to get even bigger as we get older. And I was lucky enough to team up with a couple of partners, Dec Dugan, he used to be the head of Pfizer's drug development internationally, and Greg Bailey, who is a well-known funder, not founder, but funder of biotech companies. And we set up a couple of companies. One of them is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And if you have any listeners who are suffering from migraine, it seems to have the best drug for migraine on the planet. And the company's public. It's very valuable now. And the drug's on sale in the US, and I assume will be on sale in Europe quite soon.
What's the name of that drug?
It's called Nurtec, and right. It's an oral CPRG inhibitor. It's taken off like a rocket in the US, FDA approved. We started the company 5 years ago, which says that you don't need to wait 10 years and spend $1 billion to develop a drug, and that's why we're excited about longevity and Juvenescence. Anyway, the three of us are of advancing years, and believe it or not, I'm the youngest of the three, so it tells you about the average age of our group. And we got really interested in the science of longevity, which has come into its own since the unveiling of the human genome. And the science of halting, reversing, slowing aging is now catching up with the aspiration of just about everyone, including you and me, to live at least a healthier life in the latter part of our lives, because so many people, when they're older, suffer from one or more diseases. And then ultimately to add a few extra years of life as well. And so we set up this company. We've raised about $250 million for it so far. And I'm pleased to say that sometime next year, the company will go public here in the UK, because it's largely its operations are in the UK. And it's got about 20 projects, some of which are really very exciting. And I'll be happy to tell you about them.
Well, one that I think might be within that sphere is the biological age clock. So you can now do a test, can't you? Is that one of those projects in that company? So you can now test your biological age rather than your actual age, so you know where you are roughly in that time span. Is that right?
Yeah, Juvenescence doesn't have such a clock, but a company in Hong Kong, which I'm an investor in, called Endurance RP, is developing such a clock. I haven't used it myself.
Oh, you haven't? I was going to say, would you use that? That's the key question.
I'm probably too scared to find out my biological age is higher than my chronological age, but they're still not very accurate. You know, they use methylation of DNA as a means of testing, and they're still a couple of years either side, but they will become more accurate, and then they'll be really important. They'll be important because, you know, you and your business, which is, you know, substantial, will be able to offer your clients the opportunity of seeing what you're doing with them having an effect on their biological versus their chronological age over a year or so of training. It'll be fantastic. It's very motivating, and also it's very validating for, you know, what you're up to. And then in clinical trials of drugs and therapies, rather than waiting 30 or 40 years to see if an anti-aging compound works, you'll be able to see it much quicker by using such things as biological clocks and biomarkers of aging as well. So it's going to be a very important development, but it's still a little bit early for mass commercialization.
Is there mostly this? Look, this is all very. It's big investment, big business. I know there's famously quite a few people who are very wealthy, Jeff Bezos included in there, Peter Thiel, who are spending a lot of money on effectively finding the answers to longevity. And the key distinction there is actually longevity and health, isn't it? Actually, you made the point already, is that I know David Sinclair, he reckons that people can live for 150, 200 years possibly. Aubrey de Grey has said that the first person to live to 1,000 years old probably has been born already, and so on. And yet there's been lots of researchers who are saying that actually the body's cells might not be able to go beyond 140 or 50 years old. But there's a lot of guys spending a huge amount of money on the key to live healthily, so live energetically for longer. I think David Sinclair himself says it's fine to live 120 or 30, but you should be playing tennis when you're 90, 95, 100 years old. So you've got to be useful and purposeful. Is there a danger, though, with that much money going in from some key people, that becomes a preserve of the rich to actually get the benefits? Or is there a way it's going to be democratized to then go down across the wider populations?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Look, the answer is that all pharmaceutical development and all biological development demands a price for innovation. And that's why in the US, drug prices are so high for prescription products. But the good news is that the patent lives of drugs are only 20 years, and it takes approximately, on average, not including our migraine drug, but on average about 10 years to develop them. So there's about a 10-year period of commercial exploitation when the price of drugs are high. And then after that, they go what's called generic. So I'll give you an example. Anti-ulcer drugs, when I was a young guy, were ferociously expensive. Things like Zantac, Tagamet had just come on the market in the 1980s. And they were really, really high priced. And today you go into Boots and you buy them for nothing because they're off patent. And that's what will happen to these drugs. They'll be initially expensive, and then they will come down in price, so they'll be available to everyone. But there are 7.8 billion people on the planet, and if everyone spends $1 a day on staying younger and healthier, that's a huge, huge market, bigger than anything we've ever seen in any industry ever. So there's a big prize out there. But we are at the moment in the dial-up phase of the internet. This is a very early stage. We don't know. If you remember the dial-up phase of the internet, we didn't really know what the purpose of the internet was then.
Sure.
There was some information going around, but a bit of email and so forth, but it wasn't enmeshed in our lives like it is today. We're just at that stage. We don't really know what's going to work. We know that some things will work, and that's what we're trying to do. And so it's a very iterative process. There's no pill that you'll be able to hand out to Matt Roberts' clients in the next 10 or 20 years to enable them to, add another 20 or 30 years to their lives. It's going to be a longer process, but it's going to be a fruitful one. And I do think that, if you don't make it to 100, I may not be around, but I would be very disappointed on your behalf.
Well, me too.
And you've got a very good chance of living to 120. Now, bearing in mind, in 1900, you and I would have a life expectancy of 47 years.
I
Okay.
know it is
And now
wild.
we're talking about routinely living to centuries, basically, a full century, and in much better health. So this is a wonderful breakthrough. But as yet, Matt, everything that's happened in longevity has a result of environmental factors. So improved sanitation, less infant mortality, vaccinations, no more important than now, and antibiotics. None of it has been as a result of biological interference on our bodily processes. And that's what the next wave of innovation is all about. It's about looking at the pathways of aging, and they know that there are between 15 and 20 key pathways. All of them are malleable. They're all, you can interfere with them, and you can, as a result, influence positively the outcome of both health and longevity. But it's a very early stage process at the moment.
I think it is. I think one of the things that's interesting in the last few years is that everyone has, on a very basic level, tracking devices planted onto them, whether it's in their hand with their phone strapped to them, whether it's in their tennis racket with a chip inside. There you go. Exactly. We've all got a thing that's somewhere doing some sort of information gathering. And yet still right now, there's not really any pushback, or not much pushback. So you get data collected and collected and collected and given results of what you did, but no one's quite piecing it together as the bespoking of, we know all this about you now, but where do we go with this next? And I think that's where what you're talking about is going to happen, is this very defined, personalized approach to understanding your blood markers, understanding your inflammation, understanding the ways in which your body responds to whether it's sugars or certain types of fats and proteins, to then define for you your route forwards. And I think that's where this next stage of understanding that and then getting the algorithm, that's where I think AI will be fascinating, how it plays its role in taking all information and keeping on live time, updating your process into this ultimate online life coach, if you like, will be fascinating. And I'm sensing we're sort of getting there, and certainly firms are trying. I wear the Whoop device on my wrist. I like Whoop; it's very good. So things like tracking sleep on there is fantastic, and HRV scores, your heart rate variability, and they're beginning to try and do pushback information with links to other companies. It's beginning to happen, but still some way away. But Juvenescence, your company primarily around this whole longevity sphere, what's the main purpose and drive of that? I know there's a big drive within part of that on keto products and keto diet.
Yeah, so the way that we look at it is that if you look at a trajectory of how this is going to happen, and of course it may be entirely wrong, but we're hoping we're right, is it'll start with consumer products along the lines of some of the stuff you just talked about, which are linked to fitness devices. And our app, which is called JuveU, which will be free, will be out next year. It's in beta at the moment, which will allow you to, for instance, Matt Roberts' clients to input all the stuff that they're doing. It's completely agnostic. It's platform neutral. It's not about Juvenescence products or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then we have a suite of other FDA approved, so in other words, science-driven consumer products that we're going to be launching. And the first one, actually, I'm going to send you a box of it. It's called Metabolic Switch. It's a very potent ketone ester. And you know better than anyone how difficult it is for people to stick to a ketogenic diet. But a ketogenic diet is good for people. It's cardioprotective, neuroprotective, and obviously there's the benefit of weight loss as well. But this stuff is really the best on the market, and it's taken as a sort of powder mixed with water or something, ginger water or something like that on a daily basis, and it puts you into an immediate state of high ketosis for 6 hours, which means that people can take this and be in a ketogenic state without having to actually go through the travails of a diet that most people can't keep to. And then we've got spermidine, which is great for metabolic health, coming later next year, and sulforaphane as well, which you'll be familiar with as well. So we've got a suite of those products. And we hired the ex-head of Weight Watchers, the ex-head of Vitamin Shop in the US to spearhead this. And in January of next year, there's a big launch in the US. Then from that, we go into our traditional area, which is pharmaceuticals. So developing drugs that have an anti-aging potential, but a near-term commercial objective. So we have in development, for instance, at the moment, an obesity stroke cachexia drug. It switches on weight gain or switches on weight loss. And this will be an IND. It'll be filing with the FDA, we hope, next year for clinical trials. So it's fairly far advanced down the road. Super exciting. And we have a CD38 inhibitor, which is basically an anti-inflammatory platform that's oral. So most people take anti-inflammatories now are injecting themselves. As you know, Humira is a good example of that, or Enbrel. And we want to be the oral alternative to that for anti-inflammatory. And we're getting very good results out of that. And that's all science-driven, all coming out of institutions where we back scientist entrepreneurs. And then it's regenerative medicine, using stem cells and organ regeneration as a way of basically replacing body parts. So, you know, in your practice, you'll have a whole load of people with ski injuries or running injuries or whatever it is. As yet, the stem cells don't work very well, but we have a huge portfolio of stem cells that we're going to make work. And in fact, we're going to be able to regenerate, we believe, limbs in the next 5 to 10 years. But in the nearer term, we're already in phase 2 trials. We skipped phase 1, FDA-approved trials in the US to regenerate organs in the body. So if you have a failing liver, our company, Ligenesis, is regrowing liver tissue in a lymph node adjacent to your failing liver. And after a year or so, the idea is that you get a brand new functioning liver. And then ultimately the pancreas, the kidneys, the thymus, where your T cells are made. And then the last bit, and the bit that is going to be the most exciting, in my opinion, is gene therapy. It's too early yet, but one day in the relatively near future, and by that I mean the next 10 or 20 years, you will be able to have gene therapy, and it will be applied to anyone who wants it at relatively low cost to enhance your longevity and enhance your health span at the end of your life. But that's the trajectory I see. It's all going to require a huge amount of money, huge amount of effort, huge amount of regulatory, buy-in. But I do think that we're, on the cusp of something very big. And you mentioned all these rich guys who are backing companies. I mean, obviously, some of them are doing it because they want it for themselves. But, without the rich guys and their money, this isn't going to happen. So it's good that they're putting money in and they're doing this sort of stuff.
Okay, that's interesting. So with that in mind, your personal journey, in terms of the business side, that's where we're going with that. I think going back to that point, actually, that you just mentioned there with regrowing versions of your internal organs, just spring to mind, there's a danger, isn't there, that someone would actually think, this is great, I can just drink myself silly and then just have another liver and have another spleen or replace my pancreas. There's a dangerous thinking I can just replace the parts along the way. This is down the line stuff, I'm sure. But it could be a case of we can just abuse ourselves and keep on going and going. It'd be fascinating to watch how our human psyche adapts around this ability to become superhuman over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But I will say that if you've got a cirrhosis liver, it's too late. So these are people with liver failure for different reasons, generally speaking. It could be hepatitis related or just bad liver. And normally, a case of very heavy alcohol abuse is not going to be treatable by this. So,
which is probably good news.
I think we all know a few people who could do with a new liver. So I'm afraid I have to give them bad news.
Now, tell me about your own personal health journey. So this obviously, this is a part of your investment strategy. That's fine. So this is either part of your just investment strategy and it's there for making some money. But I suspect that's not the only thing for you. I know you better than that. I'm sure this is about your personal desire to actually improve your own health alongside the health of others at the same time. So how much have you learned that you've then adapted into your own lifestyle?
Not enough, actually. And, I was never healthier than when I was coming to Matt Roberts. I'm not being paid for this commercial, but I'm definitely going to come back.
By all means, it's fine.
We've been out of the UK for a while, right? So it's not been possible. But I'm absolutely, if I'm allowed, I'm going to be signing up again. I basically use something called LifeSum. And Dafina does here as well. And do you know that? And basically it counts all your calories every day you put. And it's really good because it knows all the foods. So, it could be Marks and Spencer's Indian nibbles. It knows what the calorie count is. And so I use that. And actually, I'm aiming to lose, I need to lose 3 kilos, or I want to lose 3 kilos by the end of March. And it's helping me a lot. I walk because I've got a bad foot at the moment, although it's close to being cured. So my running has been abated for a while, and I've done 42 full marathons. So even though I'm
42
not very
now, so that's
fast.
grown in number. Yeah, so that's a good point there. So actually think about your marathon times. What was your first year of your marathon? Do you remember what year you first did one?
Well, I think it was about 20 years ago, maybe
Okay.
more, 24 or 25 years ago.
So what was your first time? Yeah.
It was 3:45,
It's pretty
and
rapid.
my best time was 3:07,
Which is very
and
rapid.
yeah, my worst time has been just over 4 hours.
Yeah, okay.
And
But
I've
these are
run
all good
everywhere. And
times.
my dad took up running at the age of 60 to run
Wow.
with me.
So that's interesting. So you've got good genes going on. This is a whole thing, isn't it, as well, about in terms of how much we can stay healthy, things we suffer from. Our genes play such a fundamental part of what we are and how we can progress on. So you've clearly got some good genetic pool there for longevity. That's great. But then what you do with that is a defining factor, naturally. So when was the last marathon you did? How long ago was that?
I can't remember exactly, but I think it was about 4 years ago. And then, I had a massive pronation, like a 6% out on
Oh,
one
wow.
ankle. So I've been walking as an alternative, and I walk, 15 to 20,000 steps every single day. It's not enough, and but it's better than doing nothing. And I'm getting to the point now where my ankle is almost back in kilter. So this is really terrific. These orthotics that they can make now are just fantastic.
They're
But I
remarkable.
want to get back to I mean, obviously I'm a lot older, and I want to get back to a good level of fitness. If my father could take up marathon running and run 40 marathons up to the age of 87, then I
That's
think I
quite
can,
remarkable.
I can, and he took it up at 60, I think I can get back to reasonable fitness. So just
Yeah.
when the call comes, please let me in.
You'll be there. But for you, though, the thing for you is actually in terms of what you're doing on the investment side, the research side, that the keto approach, for example, is interesting because increasingly, keto diets, keto approach, and ketones into a program is now being used much more. They were quite silent for years about this stuff, but used much more by Tour de France teams, used by marathon runners. It's part of the program now of using it within their training program. And there are different types of doing a keto diet. So keto dieting isn't just going for the same approach all the time, which is up at 70 odd percent fats or more, and then a tiny amount, 5-6% coming from carbohydrates, the rest from a small amount of protein. It can be cyclical. It can be actually cycled through into a program. So if you're someone who's doing performance sport, you can use it as being even a 5-2 approach to a week. We do 5 days of keto, and you choose your 2 days, not consecutively, doing the slightly higher carbohydrate loaded approach. And within that, someone like you going back into doing something such as marathon training or just doing running full stop, the danger for most people when they go back into these things is inflammation grows in a localized level. So we know we get it from our Achilles tendons, we get it into the knees, into our lower backs. Keto seems to be pretty good at reducing inflammation down. We know that already for lots of good reasons around cancer research, heart disease research, even brain recovery. So along that same line, injury reduction, inflammation reduction around those soft tissues that do get inflamed after doing something for the first time in a long time can be reduced. So for you have to sort of follow what you're preaching and investing into and get into doing that to ensure you can work your way back in and not suffer with that same inflammation response. Do you take any supplements at all right now as well? Are you adding things to your diet that you maybe didn't before or you've always taken?
Yes, I've started to take metformin, which I'm sure you're familiar with,
Yeah, sure.
Matt, which is a frontline diabetic drug. And I've got a very good friend in New York called Nir Barzilai, who's a professor at Einstein University. And he's done, multiple studies on metformin in non-diabetics. And I'm glad to say that I'm a non-diabetic, showing that although it's, it's not the perfect drug, it will add years of life and reduce your chance of cancer and Alzheimer's. And this drug has been used since 1957. In some countries, it's off patent and it's non-prescription. So in Spain, where I came from this morning, you can just go into the pharmacy and buy 50 pills for €4. And so I do take that on a fairly low dose. I mean, Nir takes an absolutely monumental dose, but I take 850 milligrams. You've got to take it with vitamin B12 because it's a vitamin B12 depleter. And then, I'm not taking them, but some people are taking rapamycin,
Absolutely.
which is a golden drug, but the dosing is really difficult to get right in human beings.
So rapamycin was sort of slightly it was sort of discovered by chance, wasn't it? Something that they found in mice. There was this extended life in certain mice that they kind of didn't expect to have happen, and just literally by chance found this thing which extends life by potentially, I think there's something like sort of 40%, and not just the longevity, but I think they found with the mice that have been testing it, again, it's David Sinclair's doing the tests on this, when a mouse is given rapamycin and they go onto an exercise program, they go into their wheel and run around there. So it's kind of really high level of energy that they've tapped into, and they think that's going to give us potentially that same kicker.
Yeah, well, David's a friend of mine, and I visited his mice in Boston.
It's many mice.
He does all sorts of stuff with his mice. I feel a bit sorry for them, to be quite honest. Yeah, of course, what happens in mice doesn't necessarily translate into human beings. And what the scale of any improvement in mice, for instance, with caloric restriction or with rapamycin or with senolytic drugs or whatever, is fantastic in mice, but will be much less in human beings. So, if you go on a caloric restricted diet for the whole of your life, for your adult life, and you eat 25% less than the average, you might add another 3 or 4% to your lifespan, but it will feel like a very long life. So we need to find mimetics. We need to find ways of replicating that without putting people through the pain of doing it. And that's one of the missions of Juvenescence. And God, some of this stuff is really, it's happening quite fast. It's super exciting.
Well, I think that Bioscience is going down the same line as the computer chip industry of it kind of doubles in its capacity every year and doubles and doubles and doubles. And therefore it's got this kind of absolute just incremental shift upwards. So we're going to get lots of advances super quickly. Within that, I mean, obviously things like calorie controlled eating, sorry to interrupt, but controlled eating in terms of time controlled eating. So fasted eating. Again, this approach of reducing your calorie intake can go hand in hand with fasted eating. Doesn't have to, of course. I think University of Wisconsin just in the last year brought out a report say if you ate just one meal a day, you extend your life by possibly 5-6%. Actually, quite a big difference. But trying to eat one meal a day is incredibly difficult to sustain. You're right; it's hugely boring. And if you're someone who's also very active, you can't get enough calories in to sustain yourself in that activity. So getting the happy medium on it to be around probably the 16-8 approach. I think that, again, David probably, advises around that sort of level. Seems to be about right to stress your body and give it what it needs to try and improve its health. Have you tried doing timed eating?
Yeah, I did. I did it for about a year, actually, and I'm not sure it made any difference, but it does work for some people. I mean, David is a big believer in hormesis, which is the mild stressing of the body, and actually to the point where he thinks that a mild radioactive dose has a positive impact because it stresses the cells a bit. And it's interesting that, the longevity of people who survived Nagasaki and Hiroshima and those who survived Chernobyl demonstrates that there is something to that. They actually lived longer than the other people in Japan or in the Ukraine. We didn't have that exposure, but obviously you don't want the maximum exposure because you won't live very long. So there's something to stressing the cells. And David's big thing is NAD, which is a metabolic enhancer. He takes quite a lot of it. He actually gave me a bottle of it when I went to visit him in Boston, and I left it in a hotel room by chance. And so there's this white powder somewhere in a hotel room in Nashville. Luckily, I wasn't arrested as a result of that. But David's a fantastic guy, and just one of the luminaries in this space from a scientific point of view. There are more and more of them, and there's more and more money coming in, and so we're going to see a wave of innovation that's like nothing on earth. Because if something works, in longevity, I mean, you can just imagine it would make the hype around cannabis or psychedelics or or electric vehicles just look like nothing, because there's no one on the planet really who doesn't want to live longer and healthier. No one. Yeah. And so it's going to be a massive investment boom when it starts to work. But so far, Matt, there have been a couple of failures. Unity Biotech out of San Francisco, big hyped up company. It used what are called senolytic drugs, which reduce the number of supposedly reduce the number of senescent cells. And as you know, the burden of senescent cells grows as we get older. And they just failed in their first phase 3 trial. And then Restore Bio out of Boston was using a rapalog, which is an analog of rapamycin, to try and boost the uptake of the flu vaccine in elderly patients, and that failed as well. So the failures set the industry back a bit. But I think we're going to have, in Juvenescence, we're going to have a couple of our projects that will work out and will be quite remarkable for human health. And there's other people out there who are doing the same sort of thing. So I think it's a question of watch this space. But in the meantime, all the stuff that you do, all the stuff that you encourage your many clients to do is absolutely right. Because if you can hold on in good health for 10, 20, 30 years, so much more is going to be available to catapult you into a much longer life. And I think 120 some people think is the limit of human existence.
Yeah, sure.
I disagree with that. I think that people will be someone is alive today. I think not Aubrey de Grey style 1,000 years, but someone's alive who will make it to 150.
It's looking increasing that way. Yeah.
You, in other words.
Well, I keep taking the NAD, the NMN, the metformin, keep going with all of it. I think it's really, right. It's really just very much about just understanding the changes over time. I know personally that, I'm 48 now, and my goal when I turned 30 was to actually try and make sure, because I was an athlete, a sprinter, I had all the data about my fitness and health and well-being when I was 20, 18 years old. And I knew at 20 what my body fat was and my strength levels were and so on. So I said at 30, getting towards 30, which seemed then very old, of course, is ridiculous. And I thought I need to be at the same shape at 30 as it was when I was 20. So I got to that point, it's fine, all good. I thought maybe better. And then I thought, well, at 30, my goal now is to get to 40 with the same age as 30, and therefore 20. Of course, got to 40, and actually it was the same, literally between all the different metrics of body fat readings and mass and so on. I thought at 40, I've got to get to 50, it'd be the same as 40, and 30 and 20, and stay the same. So far, I'm there, but it's not easy, and it takes shifts in a number of things. This is what, in terms of your experience in doing marathons and your experience in understanding what you're investing into and what's happening in the science departments to understand the ways in which the body does age, having cells that can stay robust and can be given a shake, given some shocks, might get that robustness to stay there. That's the key. And certainly inflammation control appears to be right front and central in all of that, without question. And I know on a personal level, if I tried to do the same routines of exercise I did 25 years ago, I'd be hobbling around for a day afterwards. I couldn't do quite the same level of intensity as frequently. Not as, you can do frequency high levels, but not the high intensity frequently. So it's all about how you adapt over time, and using all the stuff that you're developing and researching and looking at, whether that's keto, whether that's NAD, whether that's any of the things which can try and supplement into our diets, is fundamental for controlling that inflammation, maintaining a healthy redevelopment of cells. And sugar control is a big part of that, hence why metformin comes in and keto eating comes in. But alongside that, using external therapies, using heat, using cold. Are you an advocate of using cold cryotherapy? Do you cold shower? Do you use those things as well? You tried them?
Yeah, cold showers, partly because the heating doesn't often work here, and partly because it does wake you up in the morning, and it's definitely good for you. But hyperbaric chamber, Shai Efrati from Tel Aviv, I know now. I've spoken on a couple of panels with him.
That's amazing research. You have to explain that research. That's an incredible study.
Yeah, he's amazing, that guy. And then you've also got you've got the stresses from cold and heat which are got to be beneficial to cell health. And so, yeah, I'm a complete advocate for it. I mean, I think, I know that your business is the premier one, but the opportunity for you to do cool stuff in the next few years must be just absolutely amazing, right?
Yeah, the industry is changing and morphing hugely. I think that what's good, there's two things going on, aren't there? One is you've got this advancement in science. The danger for the fitness health industry is it won't keep up with the advancements. And what we do is we try and bridge the gap and make sure we've got the right people who are on side advising and guiding on that medical and science side to ensure that the team that are in and around them, whether they be trainers, dietitians, the physiotherapy team and so on, actually are able to implement what seems to be the cutting edge of information, which changes, as you know, day by day. And we have to adapt to this all of the time. It's not some fixed item. It's a moving feast all the time, which is very exciting. It's great. But then the opportunities really are vast in the industry, in medical health, within personal health, no doubt at all. But it still isn't quite there yet, but we're pushing and pushing and pushing to get there for sure. With things like, look, I think the point really is that with all the advancements going on, people can spend a fortune on trying to find the right answers, but there are quick takeaways. You already touched on a few things already. Keto eating, we know, is one of those things that can be very open to anybody to do that. Of course, cold showers. My understanding is that cold shower for 4 or 5 minutes every day, pretty tricky, is great for giving your DNA a real shock and a shake, and that cell redevelopment becomes much more efficient. And using breathing techniques and patterns alongside that, like box breathing techniques, give you a chance of reducing the stress levels within, calming the body, reducing inflammation, and giving your HRV a chance to elevate at the same time. And these are all free to do as well, which is phenomenal. That over time, you're effectively like an F1 investor, where you've gone in, you're making the ultimate in cars that goes as quick as possible around corners and so on and so on. And then 10 years later, when you buy a Mini, it's got some of the same tech that the car had in F1 10 years ago. So it's like you're just advancing on, and your process is invest now for this churn out to be democratized later on. So what we're trying to do is give people a chance of really what can you do as the quick takeaways to understand what you can do right now without spending a fortune if you can't afford to spend a fortune on doing it. So we're sort of pushing down that line. And keto eating is a really interesting part of that. And I know that Juvenescence with its keto products is pushing that as a direction. There are downsides to keto eating, of course, aren't there? So when you eat a keto diet, people don't tell you about the excess body odor or bad breath or farting, for example. So there's things that become things to deal with, but only in a minor way.
Yeah, and I actually don't know if those adverse events occur with the synthetic ketone diet. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that.
I'll check it for you. Send me the product. I'll try that and let you know.
But Matt, since we met the last time, one of the other things that I've been doing is getting involved in the food revolution, which I think would be of interest to you. And I'm going to send you my latest book, which is on exactly that, which is growing food in factories or laboratories, basically. And it's very exciting. And it's great for human health because these foods don't have any antibiotics, hormones, bad stuff. And they are genuine meat, genuine dairy, genuine fish as examples. And, this food revolution, I went to Glasgow for COP26, and we had a professor speak there who told us that in 10-kilometer radius of Glasgow, there's a 35-year age gap for men in terms of life expectancy. And it's not down to fighting on Saturday nights or drinking too much or smoking. I mean, that plays some part, but most of it is down to eating processed meat on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And, that's 35 years. So one part of Glasgow has the highest life expectancy in Europe for males, and the other part has the lowest in a 10-kilometer radius.
It's quite remarkable.
And it's eating, frankly speaking, shit like, pasties, sausages, stuff like that. And so we are in our other department trying to revolutionize that. And already our companies all have products that you can taste.
So you're doing meat, doing fish, doing dairy substitutes.
They're not substitutes. This is real dairy, right? Grown in precision fermentation.
Actual dairy produced synthetically.
Yeah, with no cows. Wow. And
that's amazing.
So apart from all the environmental stuff, which we all know about, the human health aspect is really important because we're eating, or people who eat meat in particular, are eating a lot of antibiotics on a daily basis if they eat meat. And, because 80% of antibiotics go into farmed animals. And that just builds up our own resistance to antibiotics. And then we have an antimicrobial problem, which could lead to a massive bacterial type of pandemic, much worse than this one. So we need to do something about it. So I'll send you the book and just make of it what you will. But we've now in the last couple of years invested more than $500 million in this area. So it's a big, big push for us. And I believe, because I'm an animal lover, we don't eat meat here in our household. We have 7 dogs. So I just don't want the animals to suffer. But importantly, this will also reduce our suffering potentially from eating bad food. Obesity, diabetes are a direct result of the crap diet that people eat around the world. Simple as that.
Absolutely. How long have you been meat-free for?
7 years in my case, and Dafina nearly 3.
And how are you feeling as a result of changing? What was the main purpose of changing initially? Was that on a moral basis or was that on a health basis?
No, moral. Completely moral from my point of view.
Just animal lover and
No, well, because I started to research this area, I realized just, the production of it. I mean, the idea that cows are all happy out in the field and that, the pigs are gambling around, it's just nonsense. They're having terrible lives and very short lives and injected with hormones and antibiotics to be growth promoters. So a chicken today, industrial chicken, will live for 23 days on average. It's 3 times the size it was in 1950. A dairy cow will live for 2.5 years until its back is broken because its udders get too big. And its calves, and it's continuously pregnant for obvious reasons, get ripped away from it. It's a brutal, horrible industry, right? So
entirely.
I just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, it just revolts me.
Do you have any idea what the change in water usage is when you're doing a synthetically produced, grown piece of meat or dairy rather than doing it as being the old-fashioned way?
We do.
I guess considerably less.
Minus 93%.
93% less water used by doing it.
Yeah.
And obviously on the methane side, huge reduction on methane to being, 0.
No methane. So the stats are as follows. 1% of land use, 7% of water use, less than 50% of the energy use. I mean, it does use energy because you've got to stir the fermentation tanks and heat them.
But by renewable energy can be done. Solar power, using wind power, if you're doing that too, you can actually done very straightforward on site within a local environment.
Absolutely right. And you can situate it anywhere. So if you've got a food security issue, which we have in this country, by the way, we import 50% of our food, then you can make it in situ. And it ticks every single box unless you happen to be a dairy farmer or a beef farmer or an industrial fisher kind of guy. And by the way, all this stuff will be on the market soon. So the fish will be on the market in the US next year. The dairy products have just gone in the market in the US. And I predict that within 10 years, you'll have no large dairy herds being milked around the world. It'll just become completely unviable. And all the meat we're looking at, which is principally ground beef, which is 60% of the meat market, will be on the market at scale within 3 years. So, this is already chicken nuggets are on sale in Israel and Singapore. This is just the way of the world.
And these, I guess, are being grown and engineered to ensure that they really are for their purity of meat. Because you're not going to produce a thing which clearly is the fattier version of this. You're going to go for the thing which is the healthy version of this, the leaner version of this. So therefore, you're producing a product which is across all levels healthier for the individual.
Yeah, I mean, you've got it. So basically, if you take my little fingernail and you equivalent in size a sample from a cow, although you need to use samples anymore because the stem cells are immortalized. But theoretically, you take that little fingernail, you extract the cells that you want, the stem cells that you want, the precursor cells, which are fat and muscle cells, and you grow those independently in big stainless steel tubes, which are called bioreactors, and you feed them nutrients, which are equivalent to what a very healthy cow would eat if it was allowed to eat, the best sort of food. And you introduce growth factors, which cows have anyway. After about 40 days, you get the equivalent of 7 or 8 cows worth of meat, which is 3,000 kilos. And that would take 28 months on a feedlot to grow the same cows. And so the number of inputs that you need to put in to get 1 unit of output in our type of factory is 2.5 to 1. A cow, on the other hand, It's 25 to 1. It's a very inefficient factory. Wow. And in the process of feeding cows, 70% of all crops go into feeding animals. You're also chopping down the Amazon rainforest to grow soybeans to feed the animals. So you don't need to deforest anymore if this works. And we know it works. It's just, it's a question of getting it to scale like anything else. And the reason I got involved in this is because it's a biotech process. And I've been spending 15 years on biotech. So it was a no-brainer. But it's so good for health. It's just so good for us. And, you can imagine a Matt Roberts, for instance, diet that's grown in a lab that's a combination of various foods.
Well, that's my next question is if you're a sports person, if you're an athlete, well, we're getting close to the point in the next sort of decade where you can almost say, I need to have this exact macro makeup of my diet. I need to have this much protein, this much fat, this much carbohydrate. And you're effectively producing a bespoke steak that fits the bill for that individual, whether that could be a steak designed for pre-workout or post-workout or whatever else it might be. So you're actually making it become entirely bespoke for that one person to get the exact nutrients they need day by day at a timed eating process. I guess getting to that level of detail at some point down the line, which would be a remarkable shift. It takes all the guesswork away from an athlete.
Yeah, I think that's possible, but I think that's some way off because, the first thing is you've got to make it at scale to create the cost efficiencies so that people will buy it. At the moment, the stuff is about 6 times the price of regular conventional food. It used to be 10,000 times the price, so it's coming down. And the name of my book is Moore's Law because it's a riff off Moore's Law, the semiconductor law. And
nice.
So, but it's coming down so quickly that it won't be very long before it's at parity, basically, and then below. The personalization of food, I think, is going to be that's going to be longer, but it's coming. Personalization of medicine, fitness advice, food, it's all going to happen. And we're lucky to live in the world. I mean, I wish I'd been born 20 or 30 years later because everything is so exciting now. It's completely more exciting than it was when I was in my 20s or 30s. So this is a really great moment to be alive, notwithstanding the pandemic and all the difficulties that we face in daily life at the moment. Be optimistic. It's just a great time to be alive.
No, it is. It's remarkably exciting, actually. It really is huge stuff. I think that, like all these things, the pandemic actually, what it does, like any crisis, is produces a drive in certain industries and areas. And this one, the nature of what we're going through is this crisis, as opposed to the Second World War, which was an arms race and an arms build and weaponry and flying tech. This one now is all about bioscience. If anything, the need to produce vaccines, the need to produce answers to this question about the COVID crisis has meant that bioscience has never been more relevant, never been bigger, and therefore going to get, I suspect, and you're already in it already, this drive for the next 10, 15 years that follows on, which, by the sound of it, you're saying isn't actually just going to make sure that we live for longer. That's one part of the equation. We're going to live healthier for sure. But also, if you actually extrapolate out of that too, with just that meat aspect and that dairy aspect alone, the reduction in methane levels globally, if that was to take hold, could be the kind of turning point for the environment to actually reduce the levels of greenhouse gases and reduce the global warming effect. I mean, it's got that potential to scale to, given the level of methane produced and its impact on the environment. So there's a whole host of wins here.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself. 31% of all global emissions come from agriculture and deforestation. Yeah. 31%. It's more than any other type of activity. So, why not just work on that to reduce it? It's a no-brainer, right? So,
well, it sounds like you already are.
Well, I'm trying to, but it's another reason for me to come into Matt Roberts. I've got to get my mind off all this exciting stuff because I've got to focus on keeping myself going as well.
Well, it's a good point. So with all this in mind, then talk me through how your day runs. So how do you sleep? Are you a sleep tracker? Do you monitor your sleep and analyze it to death? I know I do. It's boring, but I really do. Actually, I love the data behind all of it.
No, but I sleep quite well. We go to bed at 8:30 to 9 o'clock. I'm up at 5 every morning without fail. Doesn't matter where I am. Occasionally I can nap anywhere basically, and I have done since I was 20 years old. So occasionally I have a nap. Actually, most days have a nap for 20 minutes. The sleep is not a problem for me. and I know that you can monitor it and see how, your REM and so forth, but I've never had that difficulty. And I think one of the key factors in driving dementia, which by the way, most people don't know, the incidence of it is going down. The proliferation is going up because there are more old people, but it's actually going down. One of the key factors, I think you said this earlier on, Matt, is engagement, having a sense of purpose and use in life. And it's really important, I know for you, for me, that as we get older, we retain that we feel that we're not marginalized, we're not off to the golf course or wherever people go to die, but we're actually contributing to society. And personally, it's a joy to get out of bed in the morning. And that is, my absolute favorite time is getting out of bed at 5 o'clock every morning. It's just wonderful.
Well, I think we are going to have to readjust our thought process with this, aren't we? Because I know that retirement age now, what's the official age in the UK? It's about 64, 65, somewhere there.
No, 67.
67 now, but we're so underbaking that for the future. I think we need to get everyone's mind around the fact that we might have to work until we're in our 70s, our 80s, our 90s as time goes by, because besides the fact that economically that's important, just in terms of our ability to withhold ravages of Alzheimer's, dementia, we've got to have that vitality, have that purpose, have that ability to keep on it all the time, because our brain needs to be tested, have that functionality always given some drive alongside high levels of circulation, good mobility, and ensuring we have a generally well-working structure and system and good gut biodiversity. So we have to have that ability to think beyond living till the age of 82, 83. It's got to be way beyond that right now. We're not all going to get there, clearly, but we've got to shift that mindset and really focus on how we extend ourselves. And kids who are now in their, my daughter is 19, my son is 17, for them in their lifetimes, they'll experience, I suspect, 3 or 4 careers. It won't just be one career. There'll be a number, and have that mindset of, find what you love and enjoy, do that thing, but be prepared to change that and adapt that and grow into a different direction. I think we have that mindset for our younger generations coming through. Then we've got a chance of keeping them really focused and mentally agile. The danger will be when we get to the point where we have cracked longevity is that we have a long time not being vital, a long time not working, and this paralysis that comes with that as well, supported by at present, a smaller, younger population. So we've got that kind of issue about that age differential going on. So there's issues that are there politically coming up going forwards, but those are all to be crossed at some point. What else in your day? So do you meditate at all?
Only in a walking sense. When I'm walking, I'm just thinking, but I'm not actually lying on the floor and meditating.
Okay.
Don't know.
Have you tried it?
No, I need to. Another reason to come to you. And
for some people, it's not the thing. For some people, it's just not quite in the psyche, and it's very hard to do frequently and well. It might be the things like breathing techniques could be better for you instead, because they're easier to stick to as a regime. It's a bit more mechanical. Most guys respond well to breathing techniques rather than straight meditation.
Yeah, I'm up to. I'm going to make the 2022 the year of my personal health.
Experiment on you.
Yeah, because I can't come onto webinars like this and not be doing what I'm preaching, but not to an excessive level. But I'll just give you 2 things that I think are really good to do. One is to learn languages, all right? And I talked about my father earlier on. In lockdown, he learned how to speak Italian. That's his 8th language. Yeah. So that gives you a sense of purpose and drive. And then you go to Italy and then, you can speak with the locals. I mean, how cool is that? So I'm learning, I do speak pretty good Spanish already, but I'm learning at a higher level at the moment on this app called Duolingo, which you probably know it. It's a really good app that teaches you 10 minutes a day. And I'm also learning Arabic, which is bloody hard, I have to say. And then the other thing that I think is really worth doing, and I know that this is true, is that if you do word puzzles like crosswords on a daily basis, it is very engaging to the brain. And it's also competitive. In a competition, it's good for you. And the one that I do is Word Storm. I've got no economic interest in these things, by the way, Word Storm, which costs like a couple of quid and you've got it for life. And Dafina and I do it competitively every single day. And you basically have to make up as many words within a word wheel as possible. And it sounds simple, but it's really good for brain health. And we've got to look after our brain health.
Jim, I bet you're a nightmare at Christmas party. You'd be so good at these things as well. But you're right. The thing is, we have to test ourselves in all ways. We have to, test our brain. We have to test our gut. We have to examine the way our gut functions and give that diversity. It's all about, the whole body is about diversity of approaches all the time, whether that's things that you feed into it, things that you challenge it with, whether you're physically overloading in different ways through exercise or through some form of deprivation and eating or through the cold. What they're all doing all the time is just challenging and challenging physically, whether that's the muscles, whether that's the brain, whether that's the internal organs, constant challenges to get that regeneration, to get that purpose for growing. Because effectively, we're designed in some ways to actually reproduce, and then we become slightly useless, which means by the age of about 40 odd, we're effectively biologically slightly useless. But we know, of course, we're going to go way beyond all that. But this is all just about having this drive, having that real purpose, having that push. If we can get to that point, then we'd be really winning for sure.
I completely agree with everything you said. Totally.
Well, it's good to know.
Yeah, no, you're a beacon of hope for all of us.
Let's hope so.
I just think that there are so many opportunities for young people out there today to make a difference by getting into industries that are just going to change the world. Everything from quantum computing to bioscience to they're just vast opportunities. So the idea that this is a forgotten generation or a lost generation is a load of nonsense. Just get out there. It's a great world for you.
Totally agree. Jim, we're out of time. You've been a tremendous guest. Great to hear your input on what you're doing within this such important aspect of our human development and longevity. And good to see you looking so incredibly well as well. So really good to catch up.
I'd love to see you for both professional reasons, and I probably don't drink beer, but we could either share a beer or a smoothie or something together.
We'll share a beer for sure.
Oh, great. Okay, fantastic.
Jim, thank you. Bye-bye.